Hello, this is part 25 of our game making tutorial, and this one's about tutorials. I want to make a tutorial for our game, which is kind of almost the last thing left to do, really, before... One thing you learn is like, I was going to say before it's finished, but one thing you learn is that the definition of finished will change depending on where you are in the project. At first it seems like, just get the features in there, then it's finished. Then you realise, no, once the features are in there, you need a tutorial. Once we've done the tutorial, we'll probably have to think about the fact that right now we have no way of giving this game to someone. We need to like compile it into an executable thing that someone else can run. And then once you've done that, you've got to think about where it's going to be hosted, and then whether you're going to sell it, whether you're going to give it away for free. And I'll go through that, as much of that as I can, but this time just tutorial. And it may be more about design than programming, or at least the programming of this is going to be very easy. It's going to be mostly stuff we've already covered, and that you should know how to do pretty well. But it's really the challenge of making a tutorial is about how you structure it, which actually I guess is as much code as design, but I guess most of the sort of strong feelings I have about it are design based, and I wrote some of them down. I reckon a good tutorial means you need to teach one element at a time. Ideally, you don't overwhelm the player with loads of different things all at once. Even if you know as the designer, oh, you don't need to worry about that, that's not relevant, it's not going to hurt you, it's not going to do anything. As the player, you have no idea that's true. Anything on screen could be something you're supposed to understand and something you're supposed to interact with. So take everything off the screen except the thing you're trying to teach. Minimize challenge, that means danger, threat. Make sure the player can't die unless that's what you're trying to teach. I.e., if you want to teach how an enemy can hurt you, then obviously they need to be able to hurt you, but make that the only enemy and make it easy to avoid. And make the player demonstrate their knowledge. So if you tell them something, you need a test in the game, in your code or in the structure of the game, to ensure that they prove they understand that thing before you move on. Not as a kind of exam, but just because it's one of the easiest ways for a tutorial to go wrong is if the tutorial progresses but the player didn't understand what they were supposed to learn from the first thing. So as much as possible you want to have a situation where there's no way for the player to progress until they demonstrate that they understand what you're trying to teach. And we'll do that. Hopefully we'll do all these things, because that's what I just said we should do. And I think you should avoid disabling things. That's one of the things that really frustrates me with like RTSs or anything with a lot of interface, is for the tutorial they think, oh, we don't want to overwhelm you, so we'll turn off these different buttons. And even to the point where they'll do stuff like, they'll tell you to press the button, their dialog box pops up to tell you to press the next turn button, and while that dialog box is up, the next turn button is disabled because it's been disabled until now, because they don't want you to do that before they explain it to you, but the dialog box itself is disabling it, so you have to manually dismiss this dialog box to get to the end turn button and click that, and I hate that shit. And it's not just frustrating, but it's genuinely confusing in most situations, because you have an instinct of, oh, I think to do what I want to do, it's probably this button, the logical thing to do would be click that button, and it doesn't work. And you don't know if it doesn't work because the tutorial disabled it, or because it's not a thing that works in this situation. So don't do that. The biggest one, which is for some reason number 2 in the second of 2 lists, is don't interrupt. I hate stuff. I mean, this actually would have solved that problem I just described, where the problem was that the dialog box interrupted me. It stopped everything else, and I wasn't allowed to do anything until the dialog box went away, and I hate that. It's not that hard to put information on screen without interrupting the player. It is harder to make sure the player reads it, and that's why you need to do this make the player demonstrate their knowledge thing. And in a tutorial situation, that's quite easy. In a game situation, if you actually want to, while the player's already got access to the full game, then you want to check that they understand something, that gets trickier. And that's what I'm trying to do in Heat Signature at the moment, and it's very difficult. But in fact, I'm thinking about doing a bespoke tutorial for Heat Signature, because it's just so hard to teach things dynamically all the time. We are making a bespoke tutorial for this game. It's going to be nice and easy. And lastly, don't use more than a few short sentences at a time. It's just, you might think you're imparting more information by writing a longer paragraph, but you're actually imparting less, because people just won't read it. People just have text blindness. If it's more than a short sentence, you just don't even see it. It's not even there. It's amazing. So, we're going to make the tutorial a separate room. So I'm going to just duplicate our level 1 and call it our tutorial. And in its creation code, right, currently we do 2 things. We initialize the room and we generate a level. We don't want to generate a level anymore. So we're going to take that out, but before I do, I'm just going to open it up, I middle click there to open it up, and see if there's anything in the generate level process that we want, and there is. We create the player. So I'll copy that out, say OK to it, and we delete generate level, and now instead we just create the player. And actually, when I was testing this earlier, I found that it wouldn't save our progress if we quit during the tutorial, and it was because in the initialize room script, we run this save progress script here. That we did this ages ago, so it's okay if you don't remember it. But in our save progress script, middle click to go into that, we check that the player exists before we save progress. And I think that's from back when we used to save the inventory here as well. In which case you do want to check the player exists before you save his inventory. But to save which room you're on, we don't care whether the player exists. If you're on room 19, if we had 19 rooms, it doesn't matter if you're dead or alive. If you got there, we want to remember that you got there. So I think we'll just delete this. We don't need to check that the player exists to save what room you're in, because there's no room is not a property of the player, it's just where the game is right now. So that will save us some hassle. And then we're leaving that alone. We didn't change initialize room, and we do want to call it. And now when the room starts up, we'll initialize it, we'll create the player, and then let's have a tutorial object. I think that's the best way to structure this. So the tutorial object is going to be another invisible thing like the game object and like the menu object, although arguably the menu object is visible. But you don't see, it's not an actual object that you physically is represented in a level. And you could, one school of thought is to have like just one of these objects, like the OGame object could handle all of the menus and the tutorial and anything else that doesn't correspond to an actual in-game object. Personally, I prefer to split them into things that are built for one task. So the menu object will do all the menus. The tutorial object will do some things that look a bit like menus. We're going to reuse some of those functions, but it's for tutorials, and it's only for the tutorial. And one of the nice things about that is I've had quite a lot of situations in Gunpoint and Heat Signature where it's useful to just say something like set the visibility of the tutorial to false, and you know that's going to hide all of the tutorial stuff. Or you could set the visibility of the HUD to false, or the visibility of the menus to false. And you know which bits you're disabling. You don't have to go into the code of those objects and disable individual things. So, tutorial object. I think we're going to do most of what we wanted to do is display this empty room. I want to teach you the controls. Once you show that you know the controls, we'll spawn one enemy, and then we'll teach you how to deal with that enemy, and then we'll spawn the next one. So, we want an empty room at first, and in fact we won't even spawn the enemy, staying true to our minimize challenge thing, or minimize, let's change that to minimize danger. We're not going to spawn an enemy unless the enemy is what we're trying to teach you about. So initially there'll be nothing, just the player, and I wanted to display all of the controls, and when you press the control we're telling you about, it goes away. So you sort of have to press them all to prove that you understand them all. And our event is going to be draw, and it's going to be draw GUI, because we want to draw things in a particular position on the screen. We don't care where it is in the world, we just only care about the screen space. And now, if we go to our menu object, in that draw GUI event, this is our system for drawing a series of, sorry, I'm just going to check this recording. This is a system for drawing a series of buttons and menus and stuff. And so let's just copy, I'm going to copy everything under the titles category. Let's say OK to that, and get rid of the menu, we won't need that anymore. And now we're going to put a new piece of code in our tutorial draw GUI event, paste all that in, see what we've got. The thing at the top actually is setting, right now this code is displaying everything in the middle of the screen, and I want the tutorial stuff to appear on the left because I don't want it to get in the way of the action. So here where we used to say that the text should be aligned in the center, we're going to say align to the left. We are not going to use the title font because that's enormous. We are not going to use, let's make a new font. So F menu I think is still too big for tutorial text because it's big. So let's duplicate, what do they use? F menu. And yeah, that's too big for tutorial text, definitely. Let's make it like 16-ish. That's pretty clear. Maybe 18, just to be totally safe. And we'll call it F tutorial. And that is the font we will use here. And now this function for drawing text is very useful. We want that. And I just scrolled and totally lost where I was. I'm going to maximise this. And buttons, we won't need any buttons for this. I'm not going to make you click on things in the tutorial. And this thing was just a thing for making a spacer, like sort of spacing apart different menu elements by increasing the value of the Y value that we're going to draw next. Phrase that weirdly. Okay, so this is basically the stuff we'll be working with. We're going to, oh yeah, right at the top, this is where we center it as well. This bit determines if we draw text here, do we want here to be the center of the text or the left edge of the text or the right edge of the text? We want it to be the left edge, but now we also want to tell it where to draw, and instead of being at the middle of the screen, we'll say 20 pixels from the left and 20 pixels from the top, just in a little bit. Some displays cut a few pixels off the edges and tops and stuff, so be wary of drawing anything right at the edge. And then this is just standard initialization stuff. I'm going to put all that stuff together, and in fact all of that should go together, and this is the functional part. So our first tutorial thing, what I want to do is we're going to need to have sort of phases of the tutorial where after you've demonstrated this set of things that you understand, we'll show you a new set of things. But I also want you to let me think about this. Is this actually necessary? Maybe it's not. Yeah, okay, we'll do it this way. Basically, the way I practiced it, I'm just realising as I come to do it, it might not be as important to do it this way as I thought, because we're going to teach a small batch of controls at once. But what I want to do is have each control that we tell you about, or each instruction we give you, disappears as soon as you show you understand it. And for controls, that means as soon as you press the button. So our first thing is going to be something like W move up. So we're just telling you pressing W moves up, but I want to check, have you pressed W already? So I'll have something like if W pressed equals false, then we draw this text. And then of course, if you press it, keyboard check, yeah, keyboard check's fine. Ord brackets W, then W pressed equals true. And we never set it back to false, so once you pressed it once, whenever, this will stop displaying, because next time around it'll already be false. Sorry, it'll already be true, so we'll fail here. Now, that's all good, and we'll just go through that same process for all four controls. So S be the next one, S here and S there, and then D, D here, D there, A here, and I screwed it up. And S is moved down, moved downward. God, I can't type. D is moved right, and A is moved left. That should all be good. What was I thinking about? Oh yeah, so two things we need to do now. We're going to test this, but before we can, we need to initialize those variables. Right now, we reference them before we ever tell the code what they are. So in the create event for the tutorial object, we're going to paste all that and just change it to say W pressed equals false, S pressed equals false, D pressed equals false, A pressed equals false, and that's it. And now the other problem is that our tutorial room, see, this is a little GameMaker irritation. It still says room 2 down there, even though we've named it here. And as far as I know, the only way to save your progress on something is to click the tick, which means it's got to close the window, and it's also got to close the window of the start code that we're working on. But we've got to do that because if we don't save it, then even when you compile the game, it still doesn't save it. So like when we reference our tutorial, which we're about to do, it will crash because it thinks it doesn't exist, even though we named that room. It's weird, but anyways, the short answer is just click those green ticks all the way down time. Where are we going? Menu. When you start a new game, we want to take you to Wait, in the Draw GUI event, we want to take you to... okay, so right now, if we press New Game, we take you to our level 1. Now we want it to be our tutorial. I guess if you're in the middle of a game and you start a new game, there's an argument that maybe you want to skip the tutorial, but I don't think we'll go into that. I think if you start a new game, we'll start you from level 1. The style of tutorial we're doing here is more like Gunpoint than Heat Signature, where Gunpoint has about 4 or 5 levels where they just introduce one element at a time, and it's part of the game. You couldn't really skip it. I mean, you can skip levels individually, but we'll make you do it each time. Particularly because we're going to design one that's so quick, and it's basically playing the game, so it won't be arduous to get through. That's it, isn't it? Yeah, that's the only reference to it, so this should be good now. I think there might be 1 or 2 problems that I already know about, but we'll see them and then we'll fix them, if this works at all. Oh yeah, hopefully you'll probably hear some fan noise from my computer still, but it should be better now because I'm using an external mic. I figured out a way to do it after great pains. Okay, so it's loaded our progress from last time we played, but if we click New Game... Alright, several problems. One is, it thinks we've won the level because there are no enemies left, so we need to put in an exception for that. The other is the text isn't displaying, and that's because I think we forgot to place the tutorial object anywhere at all. Like, we made a tutorial object, but we didn't actually create it. So in the R tutorial creation code, yeah, let's do this. In the R tutorial creation code, after we create the player, let's also create the tutorial. And it'll only exist on this one level. Once you leave, the tutorial object will be destroyed and we'll never use it again. It doesn't matter where it is. In fact, just to make our code look a bit simpler, we'll spawn it at 0, 0. And now, what was the other problem? The victory thing. So let's go into the menu, and what does it do at the moment? That is in the step event, I think. It says, if there are no enemies, then display the victory message. But let's put an extra condition on there and say, and room equals... We could say, and make sure the room isn't the tutorial room, but actually I think we only ever want to show the victory message on a proper level, don't we? We don't want to show it on the start room or anywhere else. So let's check that the room is level 1, which is a stupid name for it because it's our only level and it actually regenerates into all the levels of the game. We could rename it, but I can't be bothered. So that should fix both those problems. And then we can test whether the tutorial dynamically reacts to what we do. Starting from here again. Why did it start from there? Should have saved our progress, shouldn't it? Anyway, we fixed those 2 problems, and now if I press W, that disappears. If I press D, that one disappears. No, it doesn't. A, nope, nope, nope. What have I done? Alright, let's get rid of this menu stuff, we don't need that anymore. Let's get rid of that. Let's get rid of that. I'll get back to this. Didn't I change the ords? Yeah, I did. Oh no, the variables! Stupid. Okay, down here we've got to change that. So, it was correctly detecting the key presses, but it was only ever setting W to true. So, maybe some of you spotted that when we were doing it. Right, so we've done all that. Let's also do one for the mouse. Let's say left-clicked, and make sure we do that. And the message will be left-click to shoot. And instead of keyboard check, we want mouse check button, and the code for it is just MB left. And again, we've got to initialize that variable in the startup code. And so I quite like this type of tutorial, even when, like, I think ultimately it won't prove all that necessary that, oh, it's gone black. Hey, but it remembered our progress. Yay! Why is it black? Oh, we can fix that. So now if I press, let's try pressing D first. Yeah, that one disappears. A, that one disappears. S, that one disappears. W, that one disappears. If I click, it crashes. Why Has it crashed? It can't find... Do you think the OGame object doesn't exist, maybe? Because we started on a tutorial level? I thought there was a bit of the code that ensures that that happens. Let me go into the creation code for level 1 and see. The only difference between this and our room is that... Oh yeah, here we go. Alright, so this is actually silly. Creation of the game object. No, arguably that's not silly. Isn't the game object persistent? Yeah, it is. So why isn't that just... Why are we creating it here? Because if you load a game, yeah, any level that's going to have the game running on it needs this bit of code. My temptation is to put this into the... yeah, let's actually make a script out of this. So we've got initialize room, but let's do something like initialize playable level. And that script is going to have the creating the player and creating the game object if it doesn't already exist. And we will run that at the start of every room that can be played. Initialize playable level, because we don't want to run it on the start room, because that's one, we don't want enemies to be spawning on the menu screen basically. And then we go into tutorial and just that, and then we don't need that, but we still need the tutorial object because that's the unique thing in this level. Okay, that's good. Yeah. Let's just check we have actually fixed the problem. Left click works perfectly. So, as you can see, if you know what you're doing, it's not difficult to get past this tutorial so far. Like, it's not an irritating thing. If it took a long time to go through it, we would want to have some kind of system where when you start a new game, either you get the option to skip the tutorial, or we automatically skip the tutorial if we know you've done it. We could save that to a file, for example. We already save your progress, so that if you quit the game and come back, we know you've done the tutorial. And it's only if you intentionally start a new game, we put you through the tutorial again. And again, that's only because it's going to be really, really quick to do if you know how to do it. So, that is, I think that's the first phase of the... We haven't shown you how to use the right-click thing yet, but that's because it's too much to take on at once, I think. If we tell you all the controls for that, and then we tell you shooting, those things, I think, that's what you want to know, is like, what do I do in this game? Okay, I move around and I shoot stuff. But the bait gun is the answer to a problem that hasn't come up yet. So right now you have no reason to need the bait gun, and so we could tell you how to fire it, but that's one more thing to learn all at once, and it's just completely mysterious right now. It's just like, why would you want that? What does that do? What does bait for what? We haven't even spawned a single enemy, let alone the kind of boss enemies that actually require it. So we're not going to teach that until it becomes relevant. Actually, this is something I'm sort of trying to bear in mind when I do these tutorials, like when I do this, what I'm doing right now, this tutorial about game making, is wherever possible I try to run into a problem before I tell you what the solution is to it, rather than saying, and now we need to do this because otherwise we'll have this problem. Because I think you remember it better if you've seen what the problem is and then you see, oh, that solves it. That's why I keep intentionally fucking up my code. Yeah, so all of this is, I think this is the controls phase of the tutorial. So we're actually going to say if, what should we call it? We could call them stages, sections, phases. Stage. So stage equals controls, then show all these controls. And then, at the end of it, well, not the end of it, every frame, let's check whether the player has done all of these things. So if W pressed and S pressed and D pressed, I'm going D pressed. That's not funny. I'm going to paste it a bunch of times. Okay. W, S, D, A, and left clicked. Then stage equals my keyboard has switched back to being US from UK, so I keep doing @ symbols instead of quotation marks, which is super annoying. I just said state, didn't I? Maybe we should say state. No, stage. Okay, and now we're going to have a new section that will be like if stage equals swarmers. I'm just going to fucking type it that way and just deal with it. Thing is, I can learn to press the other button, but then I've got to unlearn that when the keyboard eventually decides to fix itself. Like, what happens if I just... No. I'm not going to debug my keyboard right now. And then we'll have a bunch of code here. But actually, when we teach the swarmers, we want a swarmer to exist. So let's spawn one here. For instance, create XYO swarmer. We don't want to spawn it at X and Y because that's our coordinate and we're in the top left-hand corner. We could do actually. But let's make it random room width. And 0, Y. So at the top of the screen, but at a random place. We could actually do random room height. No, we shouldn't do random room height. We want to ensure it's at the edge of the screen so it doesn't spawn on the player and surprise them. And that puts it a good old distance away from the player, and it's kind of a focal point a little bit if you're reading text up there anyway. So hopefully I won't... I don't know. I'm over-talking this. So the reason we do that there is that this bit of code will only trigger once. If we put it in here, if stage equals swarmers, then create a swarmer, we'd be doing that every frame that we're in the swarmer stage. So all the time that we're in the swarmer stage, we're constantly spawning new swarmers, and that would be very, very bad. So this bit of code triggers once. So when we change to this new stage, create the stuff we'll need for that stage. And in this stage, let's have a bit of text that says, just some general guidance, I think. We won't even make it conditional, we'll just say, shoot all the horrible red things. So we're keeping the instructions as short as possible. Now we're calling these things swarmers, and I know they're called swarmers, and that's what they're called in the game file, but there isn't really, at this stage, any need for the player to know that, and keeping to our thing of using only a few short sentences, this gets way easier to explain if you don't try and also explain what things are called to the player. Like, the player sees it as a red thing, so we can just bypass a whole step of tutorializing by just calling them red things as well. So, the objective is stupid or horrible red things, and we could also say, I guess maybe this is all we're doing on this stage, we'll just say, if instance number of swarmer is less than 1, i.e. if you killed them all, then stage equals boomers. God damn it. Oh god, and then I missed. Okay. So I'll switch to another stage. We won't write that stage just yet, but that's what will happen. So we should see that this message disappears when we kill the swarmer. And the last thing left to do is this stage equals controls thing. That's what we want controls to be, that's what we want stage to be when the game starts. So that should be everything, right? Yeah. So all this code we were running before is now under this stage controls bit. And we have an extra check that says when you've done all of those controls, we move on to the next stage, the swarmer stage, and when we move on to it, we spawn one swarmer. And then once we're in the swarmer stage, we tell you to kill them, and once they're all dead, we move on to the next stage. And the next stage will be to spawn a green thing, and then that's... We could do it like an enemy stage and try and teach both enemies at once, but we're sticking to this principle of teach one element at a time, and particularly the boomers are tricky to explain, there's a lot to it. So WASD, left click to shoot, red thing spawns, shoot all the horrible red things, when I shoot it, message disappears, perfect. So, let's do the boomers stage. Copy and paste all that, call this boomers, and in fact when we, in this code in the swarmer stage, when we switch to the boomer stage, let's copy this and make an boomer, the same kind of place. So, once we're in here, we're going to say something like, there's lots to say about the swarmers, the boomers. Actually, so you might ask, if we want to teach about the boomers, we need a boomer and a swarmer. But we're not going to create the swarmer there, because you might kill the swarmer without letting the boomer eat it, and we want to make sure there's always a swarmer for you to work with. So we'll do something like, in fact, hey look, we've already got the code exactly as we want it. This bit that says if there are no swarmers, then let's spawn a new one. So anytime there's none, we spawn one, because you need one to work with, but this won't spawn any extra ones if there is one on screen. So we're not going to overwhelm you, we want to keep the threat as minimal as possible, there'll just be one on screen, and it's moving very, very slowly, and you have a massively powerful rapid-fire weapon, and if you die to this, it is your own damn fault. I don't think we're even going to do any tutorial stuff about death, because it's just, when it happens, you'll see it happen, and you will realise you're dead, and then shortly afterwards you'll probably realise you come back to life, and that's all there is to understand, really. It's the stuff that's critical to teach is stuff where controls always, and how do I do what am I trying to do, and how do I do it? Those two things. Death is not part of either of those things. If that happens, you'll get it. Or it doesn't even matter if you don't. That's the key thing. The stuff you don't have to teach is stuff where it doesn't matter if the player doesn't understand this. So what is the text going to say? It's going to say the hideous green things are invincible. I want to say hideous green things are invincible unless they eat a red thing. But that's too long. Believe it or not, that is too long of a sentence. So I'm going to split it into 2 lines, which we can do just like that. And they'll display one above the other. And now we do want to teach you about firing bait. In some ways, this is quite a lot to teach at once, but it doesn't matter if it takes you a while to kind of read all this text. There isn't going to be very much text, but there's going to be a bunch of separate instructions, and you need to read them all. But we're not putting any time pressure on you. You'll only have this 1 or 2 enemies now, but they're both very, very slow, very easy to avoid. You already know how to move, you already know how to shoot them, and if you ignore this text and you start shooting the green thing, you will get nowhere. You won't fail, we won't kill you, we don't stop you, we don't reset you. You'll just find that it's not working, and then you might be moved. We might be able to touch your soul and move you to the enormous effort of reading the fucking text on screen that's telling you why that's happening. So we want to tell you that right click is fire bait. Does that make sense? Fire bait, shoot bait. Bait gun. Let's just say fire bait. I think that's clear. And then if you've pressed it, then this will disappear. And while we remember, we will initialize right-clicked in the create event over here. All looks nice and neat. And what we want you to do is shoot some bait at a swarmer and get the boomer to eat it, and then shoot the boomer while it's got the swarmer inside. And that's quite a complex process, and we could make that 3 separate stages, but each individual step is so simple that I feel like we can roll it all into one. It's up to you if you want to try it as separate stages, but I think it's easier to tell you how to fire the thing, and we want an instruction that says something like shoot some bait on a red thing. God, does that make sense? I feel like in my earlier version of this I phrased this in a way that is less insane. Shoot some bait at a red thing, and then we tell you how to shoot the bait. Fire the bait. I guess we should use the same language. Yeah, that makes sense, doesn't it? Hideous green things are invincible unless they eat a red thing. Fire some bait at a red thing. That sets up the problem and tells you the solution. And remember, we're not trying to create challenge here. This is not meant to be difficult to figure out. This is the kind of challenge that we want to get rid of. The challenge of understanding how the game works. That should be a thing that just happens as quickly and painlessly as possible, and then the challenge is when we add more enemies and make it into more of a game. You can have games where things are mysterious, but it shouldn't be the fucking controls, or it shouldn't be basic functionality of the weapon that you're using. That stuff should be easy to understand. So, I'm trying to think. There is kind of multiple steps to this, but can we do it? Let's just fire this up and just see what's wrong with it. I'm thinking we disappear the right-click thing once you right-click. Then, once you successfully get some bait on an enemy, like I quickly did at stage 1. Okay, shoot the horrible red things. Oh shit! Well, that's more than one swarmer. Right-click, fire bait, that works. The message disappears. Hideous green things are invincible unless they eat a red thing. Fire some bait at the red thing. So the problem we're having here is that the game object, which we carefully ensured would spawn, automatically creates swarmers all the time. So in the step event of the game object, it says here, if there are any boomers around, then keep spawning swarmers until you hit some maximum. So we're going to add, I just realised we used the ampersand thing. Let's write the word and because it's more intuitive. And room equals our level 1. So again, only on a real level do we constantly spawn those things. So, yeah, let's write out every stage of what we want you to do. Fire some bait at the red thing. Shoot the green thing. But we don't want this to display until after the green thing has eaten the red thing, and we don't want this to display after that point. So we actually want to check, has that boomer eaten anything? So this place where we create the boomer, let's actually remember his name. Let's say tutorial boomer equals that. So you remember when you create something, it returns that thing's name, and you can store that name in a variable to reference it later. So here, these two things, we don't want to display those both at once, and the second one makes no sense. In fact, the second one is outright wrong until the boomer has eaten something. So let's say if tutorial boomer.things eaten, do you remember that was our variable for how many things they've eaten? If it's greater than 0, well, let's do it in the order that it will happen in. At first it will be 0, and we'll say fire some bait at the red thing. And if it's not 0, then we'll say shoot the green thing. And in both cases, I've forgotten what was going on in that sentence. Oh yeah, in both cases we'll say right-click to fire bait if you haven't already done that. It's kind of independent. We could nest that within that if statement, but there's no real need to. And I'm also, it's threatening to get overwhelming, so I'm going to say current y equals current y plus 50. That's just going to put a space between this, which is the whole premise of this stage, this bit, which is what you should do next, and then put another space between this and the controls, which is, that's the really vital thing that you've got to understand. And we'll gently spawn swarmers continuously for this, and that flow should work. And once you kill the boomer, the tutorial will finish, but we haven't programmed that in yet. And in fact, I think you'll find our game will crash when we kill the boomer. Shoot all the horrible things, shot that. Hideous green actually this looks a bit chaotic, doesn't it, with 2 spaces. Maybe I'll only have 1 spacer. Hideous green things are invincible unless they eat a red thing. Fire some bait at a red thing. Right click, fire bait. So I think you get that, don't you? Even if you mess around for a while. It's hard to sort of go too far wrong. You could die, but that wouldn't kill, and then it says shoot the green thing. That's nice. And it does crash. Crashes because tutorial boomer no longer exists, and we are trying to check a property of that. So we need to put this in an existence check. If instance exists tutorial boomer, then do all of this. And as it happens, that is also the condition we want to check to find out whether the tutorial is over. And so in the else statement, we're going to say if this guy doesn't exist, then we've done it. We've figured out how to defeat the enemy, and the tutorial is over, and we should actually just say room go to... Should we just say room go to next? No, that feels dangerous. let's say R level 1. And that should just start the game. Let's in fact put a little note there because that's pretty important. Start the game. We're done. Start the game. And I decided these spaces weren't as good as I thought, so I'm going to get rid of the first one, I think. So it'll be 3 lines of instruction text and then 1 line of controls that will disappear once you've understood it. The only thing I don't like about this is when this changes to that, it's not super obvious. It doesn't sort of immediately grab the attention because there was already a line of text there, and now there still is. What if I put a space here in that only happens on that one? Because then it won't appear in the same spot. That might work. That'd be more eye-catching, I think. So wow, if this works, we're completely done. I think this probably wasn't a short episode, but in my practice of it took a long time. Oh god, I clicked away. Okay. Shoot a red thing. Hideous green things are invincible, unless they eat a red thing. Fire some bait at the red thing. Right click to fire bait. That's quite a lot of text to have on screen at once, but making it come up one after the other probably involves more complexity than it's worth. Like, probably that complexity is likely to lead to bugs and misunderstanding what the player's doing. Will you get there in time? No. Alright, and that pops up. That did catch my eye. I wasn't looking at it, and I kind of glanced at it. And so shoot the green thing. Oh god! No, that's too extreme, isn't it? Okay, don't go to the next level. We're done. Let's show the victory screen, which I believe is omenu.mode equals victory. And if that works, we really are done. So this stage, it saved our progress, which is the right thing to do. Shoot the horrible red things. Hideous green things invisible until the red thing. Pass the red thing. There it is. You can certainly get in a situation like this where the red thing is nowhere near the green thing. Shoot the green thing. Virus eliminated! It actually immediately spawns another one of those, which is not ideal, but in fact it continually spawns them. That's not teaching you very good, is it? That's not teaching you very good. Next level. That takes us to the real game, which immediately killed us. I thought we had a check to prevent that. Maybe not. Yeah, I remember this game. This is great. So one thing we don't explain now currently is that the red things spawn continuously until all the green things are gone. And I don't know if that's worth an extra rule. You don't desperately need to know that. The objective is still kill everything. And if you try and kill the red things without killing the green things, obviously it'll never work. And I think maybe you'll understand that? I don't know. I guess really my preference would be to explain that in some way, but the best way to do it would be the thing I considered before, which I eventually decided against, which is to have the green things actually birth the red things. Or maybe they could like vomit them up, or maybe they could just mysteriously come out of the green things. Because that would close the loop in a lot of nice little ways. Like that would no longer need explaining because you'll see it happen and you'll understand that logic by itself. It spawns the red things in a logical location. They no longer come from the off screen, and it means that it's the green things themselves that ensure you always have the tools to destroy a green thing. So even in that tutorial, we could have skipped a step there because just the presence of a green thing would generate the red things you need to kill them. And even if you kill the red things on their own, without killing the green thing would still spawn them because he's alive. There's something neat about that logic where it's like the obstacle itself generates the solution that you need, and so it can't ever get into a situation where you're stuck. But that's beyond the scope of this episode, and we're done.